Thanks, Rob. It's good to be here, and hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here and to help initiate this Earth Day 2010 and start a discussion on several interesting issues.
Yeah, we're looking at three very different environments today and how they've been affected by the activities of humans. And so let's get straight in there and talk, first of all, about the Buffalo Commons.
Well, the Buffalo Commons is an interesting concept put forth by Deborah and Frank Popper back in 1987. They were aware that the Great Plains was in a declining population. The people were leaving, the towns were getting smaller, and so let's talk about these Great Plains a minute and what they're really like. In the east, it's east of this red line you see here gets more than 20 inches of precipitation most years, and that's about the amount it takes to raise a dryland crop like wheat. To the west of that is less than 20 inches, and so it's mainly grazing land, but here and there the use of the Ogallala aquifer allows the growing of crops and the feeding of the growing of grains for the and alfalfa for feeding cattle. Problem is that the Ogallala is about to go out, about to be used up, and it is going to mean more decline in population. The towns are disappearing. In Kansas alone, there are 6,000 ghost towns that have declined to the point of having no function anymore. And so we're looking at rural populations over much of this area of less than 6 people per square mile. When in the days of homesteading, there were as many as 40 per square mile, 4 families in each square mile, but the decline started with the Dust Bowl and has proceeded since. And so the Buffalo Commons was a concept that came about as a result of this declining population. Well, let's look at some of these issues.
There's something special, Neal, about the climate here that makes this a particularly interesting area.
Yeah, this is a semi-arid climate. The climate is, in fact, a steppe climate. That's S-T-E-P-P-E. A steppe climate means that there's more evaporation potential than precipitation. It means that the main vegetation is a dryland, short grass that is able to survive extended droughts, and it was a great food for the bison and before the Europeans began to settle here. But it is a very hardy grass. And so the whole area is mostly arid, except just after a rainfall when everything greens up. It does require irrigation for any kind of agriculture, particularly west of that 20-inch isohype or 100th meridian that you saw on the map. Now here's the result of the 1930s drought. It started in the late 20s. And throughout the 30s, it just was almost a desert landscape. The rains just didn't come. The land had been plowed. Much of it was plowed, gang plowed from horizon to horizon after in the 1920s, and wheat was raised where they could, and it was a wet time before that. But after the 1930, it just became extremely arid. That the grass was gone that held the soil together, and the soil just began to blow. In fact, one farmer said his wheat was cut off at the ground level by the blowing sand and blowing soil. Huge dust banks like this roll through northern Texas and western Oklahoma and parts of Kansas, of course, and the result of that was that there were many respiratory diseases. People literally suffocated from their lungs having so much soil inhaled. So this meant that essentially all of the farms failed then, and the migration was, of course, part of the grapes of wrath that John Steinbeck described in his book.
So how does the Buffalo Commons plan aim to restore this area?
Well, the Buffalo Commons is really a metaphor. We're already seeing much of the land being abandoned as agricultural land, cultivated land, and natural grasses are beginning to come back. Some of the land is actually going into default. Farmers having to simply leave it, and the result was the poppers had this great idea of trying to think about the concept of conservation and using this metaphor, the Buffalo Commons, to achieve it. The poppers' proposal was radical, but and initially wasn't taken very seriously by the inhabitants of the Great Plains. But they wanted to restore large areas of this Great Plains to the pre-European condition, and they thought maybe the government could purchase some large chunks of the abandoned or deserted land. It would further mean the end of hundreds more small towns and family farms and ranches. The question is whether the loss was going to be inevitable anyway. Now they're beginning to think more about this in the plains themselves, and people are rising to the occasion, began to think about how to achieve this. Maybe they could, if not make it a bison grazing land, at least they could make it put wind farms on it, for example. The bison do have an advantage over the cattle. The cattle tend to congregate. They tend to have problems with birthing. They tend to have to be fed during the coldest weather and housed or protected a bit. The bison requires none of that. They can roam free. They don't congregate too much, and they have no problem birthing. And of course, they're very hardy animals in the wintertime. So out of this could come maybe tourism. They could have alternate energy sources with the wind farms and so forth. So this is a very interesting concept, and one that's just beginning to play out a little bit, but we're seeing some support from the people who live in the Great Plains.
Well, it's an interesting concept, and let's hope they can bring that region back to some of its former glory. And you can find out more. Those of you who'd like to find out more or show even your support for this, you can visit the gprc.org, and that's the Great Plains Restoration Council, and there's loads of great information there. Now, I'm somebody who lives just a few hundred yards from the Pacific Ocean, and I'm particularly concerned about our next subject, which is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.